Well, good morning, everyone. Great to hear everyone talking about the larger Compass world we all swim in. Um, Compass can be an interesting motivator or inspiration for all of us in how we lead our own businesses. I'm sure that you wouldn't be with Compass if you weren't turned on by a lot of what goes on here. Not that it's perfect for all of us. There's always things that we can improve, but by the same token that Compass is continuously driven to grow the business, to innovate the business, to provide more value. We could take that as an example for all of us. And I know that you're all in the same boat here. So today we're going to continue our conversation. First, let me introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Severance. I'm one of the coaches here at Chirag Shah Coaching. Delighted to be here with you, holding down Chirag's chair this morning. Chirag is on the road, so we will do things a little bit differently this morning, just like we did yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, Chirag recorded a video, which is an extension of the conversation we had yesterday. So in just a minute here, I'll show that video. It's about 15 minutes talking about how to communicate your value to sellers. Yesterday, we were talking about communicating value to buyers. Today, we'll be focusing on sellers. So he recorded this video yesterday. We'll show it to you in just a minute, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about what it is you heard and saw. So I'd like everyone to think about when you listen to Chirag and his approach to communicating value. Think about two things. What is his approach like, and how does that differ perhaps from yours in any way? And secondly, what about the actual words that he uses? Is that how you verbalize things when you're talking with sellers that you're going to work with or you'd like to work with? The point here is for you to pull something out of this video that might be worth your adapting or adopting in some way that adds more value to you. And I'll say the same thing I did yesterday. If you win every single pitch that you are ever in, don't change what you're doing because it's working. But if you'd like to have a higher batting average, you can't just rely on, I've been doing this for 20 years, so I'm just going to continue to follow my gut. We're all here to explore different ways of bringing ourselves to the work. That's the approach. And then what we're actually doing in the moment when we're talking with the person that we're talking with. Chirag will say again here in the video that, the most important thing that you have to do is master your ability to communicate with other people. And this is a lifelong pursuit for all of us. It's something that Chirag and I and the other coaches think about every single day. We're pretty sure many of you do too, but if you're not, it's something you should always be focusing on. So we'll have Herson roll the tape now, and then we'll come back in about 15 minutes and talk about what you heard. So remember, think about what's different about his approach here. What's different about his philosophy here in a small or large way. And what about the actual verbalization of things? Is there a technique or a way of saying things that he uses or he mentions here that's different from what you do? And we'll ask you what that is afterwards. Herson, please roll the tape. Thank you.
Good morning and happy Tuesday, everybody. We're talking about how to communicate your compensation with sellers. So before we start our adventure today, because I do think this is an adventure, I want to press one very important thing to all of us. This right here, communicating your value proposition. In essence, the experience you create for a buyer or seller when working with them in a transaction is the most important skill that you'll have today, tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. And if you start thinking about compensation and value, as they say, it's always in the eye of the beholder. And what does that mean? It's the words you say. It's how you say it. It's your physiology. It's your energy. Are you following the 7 keys to effective conversation? Did you properly do a Med-C so you understand what you're talking about? See, I'll start with the end in mind. In the end, we want to communicate our compensations to sellers so they pay us a full commission, and whatever that is to you, it is to you. Now, when people have questions about compensation, it's for one thing 90% of the time. It's they did not understand the exact value you're giving them, and compared to one broker to another, they're trying to figure out why one person charges more than the other. Pretty simple and straightforward. So there's that 1 out of 10 person who's a haggler, that's a discounter, that no matter what you give them will never be happy. And the goal is to learn your business in a way that 1 out of 10 person, you can just walk away. So let's get into how do we effectively communicate our compensation to sellers. Number one, we need to understand what we're doing before we can even tell them what we're doing with them. Now, what does that really mean? If you don't have a clear step-by-step, repeatable, predictable, scalable system, meaning repeatable, it's the same steps you do over and over and over again. Based on doing those same steps, you know, these are the predictable outcomes. And scalable, you can scale this through as many people as possible because it's repeatable and it's predictable. So the first thing you have to do and be able to communicate your compensation and your value is understand what are your repeatable, predictable client experiences. So we're going to share our checklist with you. And essentially, this is what our end-to-end program is built on. It's all these things mapped out, done for you, email templates, scripts, and you can just take this and make it your own. Now, at the end of doing this, your clients, the prospects, should have a clear understanding of what you offer them. And if they don't see the value, you should also be okay saying, it's a business decision. Do you want to take a % less? Do you want to do it at a steep discount, or do you want to hold your value? Because what people don't think about in discounting is, if you discount it by 1% to them, what do you think they're going to tell all their friends? It's a 1% discount over and over and over again. And then you have some people that pay full price, some people that don't pay full price. And then it's this. You meet another person that's going to pay full price, and then you're challenged and you're worried. What happens if they talk to their friend that paid 1% less? And this is a challenge with discounting. So let me share my screen and we shall get started. All right, so if you look at our seller experience scorecard, how do we effectively communicate our value? Well, part of this is, and if I were all of you, I would first and foremost turn this in to a, hold on. All right, sorry about that. I wanted to make sure to actually share our most updated checklist with you, and this is directly from our program. So if you look at how we communicate this, I would take this and I'd want to turn it around to more of a client-facing document. So when you go through pre-qualifying, you're just talking about, you know, I would like to really understand what your motivations are, what your expectations are, what your past disappointments are, your concerns. I'd want to go through the med state. And then I'd want to explain to them, after doing that, I make a clear documentation of all the things that you shared that are important to, so that I can prepare the conversation for the one that you want to have. Now, some people care about this and people won't care about this, but these are all the steps that go into delivering a great listing pitch and actually sharing your value. So when you go through this, you could look at the preparing section, you prepare everything. Then when you deliver the pitch, now this is where all the money is. Now, the first thing I'd want to do when I got there is I would review my client's medsuit. I would say, John, Jason, Bob, Tim, Jane, Julie, it's been great speaking with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity of partnering with you in selling your home. You know, when we had last spoke, you had shared your motivations are blank. As a direct result, you're excited about happening blank. Your expectations of partnering with an agent are blank. Your past disappointments you like to avoid are blank and blank. And these are the concerns you have. I want to make sure that this is the things that are most important to you. And more importantly, has anything come to your mind over the last few nights you've had to sleep on it? And you want to ask them that, because you know that as time goes on, sometimes people think of new things, and that's fine. It is our job. Now, you'll want to understand how you go through price, marketing, and communication, and understanding what is important to them. Now, when you talk about pricing, marketing, and communication, how does that essentially work? Well, this is your entire experience here. For the pitch, after the listing sign, bringing the home to market, pre-launch. Now, when you have marketing calendars, open house lists, and you're able to show this to your clients in a very thoughtful way, the people start seeing and understanding the value you bring. Ongoing client communication, accepted offer escrow, closing time, post-closing. This is an entire end-to-end system. Now, let me show you when you go through the pitch, how you want to communicate some of these things so that people see a direct value. So when we think about these three things, let's go through this now about pricing. Before going into pricing, you want to explain the keys to an effective partnership. And this is in our platform that you control, I control, no one controls. And remember, this is about aligning the seller and partnership. And when you walk through it, it's what the seller can control. And really, it identifies what everyone's role is in the transaction. So sellers control the price at which they put their home on the market, the condition that the home is available once we put it on the market, the accessibility, and more importantly, and lastly, the terms. You control the visual story the home gets told once the property is ready to be shared online. You get to control the marketing, advertising, and strategy and execution. You get to control the negotiation strategy once you have an offer. And lastly, you get to control the client experience through predictable communication. And what does no one control? World events, local economy, the stock market, the interest rate, and the prices other sellers are willing to accept for the price of their home. So ultimately, I outline there's a partnership. Then the next part, and how do we deliver value? You share the market versus talking about the market. And we've talked about this in other videos, but the essence is asking them questions and having them repeat back to you the answers. So you give them a chance to understand what you're saying, as opposed to a lecture, which is just going and going, going and going, and they don't understand anything. Now, when you get to marketing, this is the most important concept. It's perceived value versus actualized value. Perceived value is what we feel that we offer a client. Actualized value is what they feel they're getting. So the important part is creating your own marketing calendar. So your perceived value becomes actualized value. So there's pre-marketing, there's launch week, there's putting in key dates. These are all things that you're going to want to figure out. And even if you don't have it in a calendar, you can just put it into a branded PDF that you're able to share with them. Now, asking great questions is the key to success in this. So I would be asking the clients, have you seen any examples of photography that you love for other homes? Have you been looking at homes online? What's appealing about the marketing? Have you read any copy that finds a home more interesting than the other? What does that look like to you? You want to have them show their hand first. And as you're going through your pitch, you're going to want to use anchoring statements. If this was the type of marketing you did for your home, do you think it would attract the largest buyer pool? Would that help you get the best price? Essentially getting them to agree and get their buy-in on everything you're doing. Now, you'll want to be able to go through this in detail, and this will take a chunk of the presentation. Because outside of price, which is something that you don't control, there's two other aspects of this. There's marketing, which is highlighted here, and then there's communication. Now, you all have access to our communication plan, but a great communication plan has your communication method, how often you're going to communicate, what you're going to communicate, as well as your business hours. The reality is, the way that real estate works, it omits the principles of every single business almost in the world. Nothing is open 24/7. Our clients want structure and they want predictability. So you can use our written communication plan and just fill in the blanks. And remember, all of these things are done through framing, right? Sharing with someone based on their current belief system and values, how something works and what could relate. So if I took my cell phone here and I talked about if I talked about having my cell phone service, I would never bring it to a place where I didn't know what time it was open and closed, or hours of operation, if they had after hours appointments, if I was able to have an emergency number in case I needed to get anything. And you quickly pivot it, right? If you don't want the experience for your phone, why would you want the period for your home? That experience for your home. So this summarizes at a high level, because there's a lot of stuff to get to, how to communicate your value proposition. So let me tie this all together. Number one, the best way to communicate your value proposition is by talking about the things that are only important to them. So if you understand what's important to another person, that's what you focus the conversation on, that's the quickest way for them to see value in you. Number two, it's perceived value versus actualized value. Don't tell me, Show me. Show the people the examples. Ask them how they would feel. Because in the end, if they hate all your marketing and they want you to do a bunch of different stuff, it's the wrong client. That's okay. Number 3, show up with all of your plans in writing, a written marketing plan, a written communication plan. And this way your clients have an actual detailed account of what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, and the results. Remember, repeatable, predictable, scalable. So these are your key methods and framework for communicating your compensation. Now we're going to kick it off to our coach who's going to open up a discussion. And I encourage you to block some time in your calendar. Make sure that you start building out your framework. And I would practice this 1 hour per week. I would make that a must if you're working with sellers. Bye, everybody. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Okay. So first question, I want everybody to think about what is something that you heard in there that's different from what you normally conceive of this process to be, or a different kind of a practice for you that Chirag happened to mention. Just one thing that stood out for you when you heard it, you thought, oh, that's something that maybe I need to think more about. Put that into the chat, please. All right, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Communication plan, don't tell, show, make it predictable, who controls what, only talking about what's important to the seller, anchor questions, engaging the client, sharing it all spelled out, show, don't tell, needs to be in writing, business hours. When you put all these things together, asking the clients if they have looked online at homes and what did they like. When you put all these things together, it adds up to a very different approach for most agents. And this is why it's especially valuable to consider adopting any of these particular practices or adapting them to your particular unique way of kind of sharing value. Remember, the point here is that you want the people to understand without a doubt what the value is that they're getting for bringing you on. They know they're going to pay somebody something no matter what. And you're probably going up against other agents who are charging maybe 0.5% less or something less than you are. And so the only way you win is to demonstrate that the value that you provide is worth the cost that they need to pay to get it. And we all make that choice when we go to the nicer hotel rather than the cheaper one, or if we decide to fly business class on a plane instead of, economy class, or we go for that nicer handbag rather than the cheaper one. We recognize some value in doing so, and so we're happy to pay that amount because we recognize the value is there. Let me ask this question. Please put yes or no in the chat. Do you understand the difference between perceived value and actualized value? Please put yes or no in the chat. I just want to check. Okay, mostly yeses, a few no's. Great. So for those of you who aren't quite clear on it, when we're talking about perceived versus actualized value, is perceived value is what we think is good and useful and valuable about what we're offering. Actualized value is what the other person understands and receives. And so the point here is there's a gap between what we perceive the value is and what someone else thinks the value is. For example, let's say that a client had a previous deal with the last person who they sold the house with, and they were not kept in touch with. Maybe, they wanted to get more information. The person never called them back. They left a lot of messages. That was one of the disappointments that they experienced with their last agent. Consequently, that's most important to them right now. Well, if you spent the whole time in your pitch talking about the great marketing plan, they may not perceive the value that you perceive in that particular aspect of your work. That is, you perceive great value in your marketing plan, you're showing on the calendar and all that stuff. That's all well and good. But on their pecking order of what's most important, what matters most is communication. And so you might see your value as this whole package of communication plus marketing and negotiation experience and market knowledge, all that stuff. But what they're really paying attention to is communication, and they didn't hear that. So you could go through the whole thing that you offer, and if you gave a little short shrift to the one thing that matters most to them, they're going to come away with an actualized idea of what your value is that's less than what it truly is. And so actualized value is the value that they actually understand and get, and therefore want to act on. And so it's very important for us to recognize that people never perceive us exactly as we perceive ourselves. And so it's up to us to understand where they perceive value, where they understand value to be for them, right? He said in the beginning, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. He's right. Every client has their own pecking order of what's most important. This is why it's so important for you to think about doing the Med C in the beginning. Remember, Med C, motivations, expectations, right? Motivations, what's motivating them to move at this time? Expectations. What expectations do you have of an agent? That tells you a lot about what it is they're looking for or what they think they're going to get. And later on, you can certainly correct some of those misunderstandings. Disappointments that they've had in the past with other real estate agents or other service providers somewhere in their life. This tells you a great, piece of information about what you need to avoid with them. And finally, concerns. What concerns do they have about making a choice right now to move ahead with, hiring you or taking this next step or whatever? And so when you do the Med C in the beginning, then you have a great idea what it is you need to focus on. If you had an initial conversation, you did the Med C and they told you about this terrible experience that they had about, this last agent that they hired didn't communicate, blah, blah, blah. Great. You're going to focus on that. And as he said, when you come back for the second conversation, you say, let me just make sure I understand you clearly. When you talked last time, what I took from that was what's motivating you to make this move right now is X. And your expectations of what an agent will do for you is X. And you had this terrible, disappointing experience last time, blah, blah, blah. And you have a little concern about X. Did I hear that correctly? Yes, you did. Great. Well, let me tell you about how we're going to communicate, which is 1,000% different from the last time, right? You're going right to the heart of what matters to them because of the previous disappointing experience. And so knowing the client, this is why it's so important. It's one reason why it's so important to be asking questions rather than telling. As Chirag said many times, the person who asks the questions controls the conversation. And then there's this related part, which is show, don't tell. Yes, tell is important, but most of us rely on tell too much. We have such great confidence in our experience and knowledge, and I'm an expert, and I'm a pro, and blah, blah, blah. But we're not necessarily listening for how they perceive value, how they can understand the value that we're communicating to them on their terms, not ours. They may not care that we really know the market because they assume every agent knows the market. So in our mind, that may be like such a great value that we bring. In their mind, it's, I expect everybody to know the market. What I'm looking for is something different. Okay, I see Luciana here saying, address the situation when you don't have the second meeting with a client. You have to address all in the first and only meeting and via Zoom. Okay, got it. So certainly it's tougher to get to closing in one particular conversation. And certainly with Zoom, it's really hard to read energy. It's harder to make that connection. For those of you who are on my Wednesday calls, we talked last time, not about thinking about persuading and performing for the person, persuading them to choose you or performing for them in the right way that you think you need to, just to get them to like you and choose you. It's more about trying to establish a personal connection with that person and offer something that's a contribution to them. And so the example that I just gave of a communication situation is a huge way for you to be able to do that. If you knew that the biggest problem that they had last time around was the person didn't call them or didn't give them the kind of frequent updates that they wanted, you've got a great opportunity. You still go through the Med C, Luciana, and this is for everybody. You still go through the Med C as soon as you're possibly able to do that, because that's giving you the lay of the land. And then you know what to respond to. If you're going to go in with a canned approach, then what you're essentially saying is, I'm just going to take the average of all the potential clients out there, and I'll just give what I think is the most appropriate thing for the average person. But nobody's average. Everybody's an individual. And so it's up to you to understand as soon as you can through the Med C what matters to them. So you go through the Med C, and then you need to deliver value immediately. And it's hard to do right on the spot. And it's hard to do via Zoom. However, if you have this stuff in printed form, if you have a marketing example, if you have a communication example, like communication could be something as simple as, I'm going to communicate with you every Monday and every Friday at 8 a.m. And I'm going to also communicate with you every time I show the house. I'm going to tell you 3 things. How many people came through the house? What's the positive feedback? What's the negative feedback? If you had just that on a piece of paper, branded with your particular name and looking good, that's something that 99% of the other agents wouldn't give that person. And so if you have some of these things ahead of time ready to go, you can say to the person, not only am I going to communicate with you well, we're all going to be on the same page. I'm going to adapt my communication process to your needs exactly. Here's a sample. Here's what I did with a particular client who wanted to be communicated with in this way. Right? So it's much harder to do, of course, but it's much harder to do via Zoom, and it's much harder to do in one conversation. But it's always the same thing. That is, what does the client perceive as value? Not what we perceive, right? Actualized value is what value looks like from the client's point of view. Perceived value is what value looks like from our point of view. From my point of view, Susie, answer Susie's question. If we're doing it all in one meeting, do you recommend doing a Med-C first and then getting a tour of house? Yes, absolutely. From my point of view, yes, because that way you can think about how you present the house according to what it is they just told you they care about, right? The Med-C's purpose and value is for you to understand what the world looks like from their point of view. And it's one of the most powerful tools for creating connection with someone else because it touches on their emotional centers. The motivation touches on their joy. They can't wait to see their little kids running around in the backyard playing with the dog on a sunny Saturday afternoon, maybe. The disappointments touches on what made them sad last time around or in some other experience. Their concerns touches on what worries them, what their anxious kind of aspects of this transaction are. And so if you can connect to those things in the process of showing the house or any part of the subsequent conversation, you're touching on the stuff that matters most to them. And you'll notice all those 4 questions are open-ended questions. You know, what's motivating you to move at this time, or what's most exciting for you to move at this time? What are your expectations of an agent? What are your disappointments from past times working with a service provider? And what concerns do you have about this process at this time? If you open the relationship with those things, they're going to take anything that's on their mind and go right to the heart of it. Hopefully they'll go right to the heart of it. They might not share everything the first minute that they meet you, but they give you something to hold on to. And when you have that in your hand, then you know what to speak to. What about having had the meetings and after the client comes back with the only obstacle as compensation? Does that mean you haven't communicated the correct actualized value? Yes. What Chirag would say is, if the person has not come to you with agreement on what it is you're proposing, they don't see the value in what you're offering. So either you didn't communicate it effectively and enough in a way that they get it, or they're not interested in it, and that means they're not the right client for you. How many of you are willing to turn down a client because they don't want to meet your compensation package? It's hard to do, right? Most of us will say, well, I'm going to try to see if I can get on, I'll stick with them a little bit longer, see if I can like finagle this in some way. It takes guts to turn away a client. But I'll tell you, my perception of qualifying a client comes down to one question only. In the end, is this client willing to work with me on my terms? That's it. There is nothing else. And if they're not willing to work with you on your terms, if they don't want to stay in touch with you appropriately as you need, if they're not willing to price the house at an appropriate price for the marketplace, if they're not willing to, let you sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning because they want to bother you at 2 o'clock in the morning with stupid questions, they're not the right client for you. And so ultimately we all make decisions, here's my kind of like standard or expectation. These are like my let's call it my standards for what I want from a client. But we're often willing to fudge those a little bit, right? Well, if they call me a little late, I don't mind. And it's 11 o'clock at night, 11:30. Well, it's a little late, but I'll do it because they're my client. Or, well, I'll give them a 0.25% or 0.5% or something that I don't really want to give away, but I think I will. Yeah, we make those decisions. But if we make those decisions too much, what we're doing is, and another way to look at that is, we're choosing to work with clients who don't want to work with us on our terms. We're choosing to work with them on their terms. And while there's maybe nothing wrong with doing that, and obviously it's your business, you can do it. But every time you do it, you somehow cheat yourself and cheat the business a little bit. And so often, unfortunately, we get ourselves into a situation where the client wants more and more and more and more. And then we're like fighting against our own client for an agreement that we ideally should have made and should have been in alignment with from the very beginning. Okay, folks, it's 10 o'clock. Sorry, we can't continue the conversation. I know there's so much more here. I see it in the comments. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Come on back at 12:30 if you like. We're going to show the same video, obviously have a slightly different conversation then. But looking forward to seeing you all again. And I'll be here tomorrow at 9:30 for those of you who would like to be on my calls. Great to see everybody. Have a great day.